Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Paul, with the SCO and China's celebration of their 80th anniversary regarding the end to World War II taking place, there is much more being determined as President Putin has spent a very long time in Beijing.
Yeah, we thought this was an interesting discussion point because Putin pays even a very unusually long visit to China. He's actually away from Moscow for the best part of a week, but part of that relates to the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, which he will attend in a couple of days. Yes, they're at the SCO summit. Yes, there is then, as you can rightly says, the 80th anniversary celebrations by the Chinese of the end of World War II, which is kind of complementary to Victory Day in Russia, of which, of course, Xi was the principal guest or guest of honor at in Moscow, and a reciprocal measure is to put Putin as the guest of honor. Well, it's interesting when he arrived, they actually gave him a 21 gun salute, which is the highest honor you could pay to an individual. But everyone knows the extent of the relationship, or most people now, certainly our podcast subscribers do, with regards to the relationship between the Chinese and the Russians. Yes, there's all this nonsense still about it's a marriage of convenience, they don't like each other. I'm sorry, it's absolute garbage. And garbage is a polite word. We should probably use far stronger language, but we won't because we get in trouble for doing so. But the fundamental question with all this is why is, for example, Putin actually gone and had discussions with Xi at his own private residence? This is kind of not what you would usually expect to see. There is kind of interesting noises coming out of the SCO. But what fundamentally underpins the relationship between the two countries is, and this will probably surprise some people, because everyone perceives Russia as to be the more aggressive, more strident country. Well, not actually, that's not the case. The Chinese are far more keen to say the world has to move on. We've given the United States, for example, far too many chances. We don't trust them. Yes, if they want to show reciprocal measures and treat us as equals and behave like responsible adults, we're happy to work with them. But we're not going to listen to platitudes. We're not going to listen to half truths. And in the next breath, find that the United States is still meddling on the periphery, at least, of Taiwan as one example, or anywhere else you want to choose in the world. We're sick of all this. Unipolarity, as far as we're concerned, is dead. It's over. And why should we tolerate it? And that's been, in many senses, the fundamental message that's come out from China. So, in essence, Xi hosted the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the main meeting, because there was one with Plus, but the main meeting, he talked obviously about free trade, but he also said we have to pursue a more just and reasonable global governance system. So we have to expand the scope of cooperation with each other, make the most of our individual strengths in the global south, and shoulder the shared responsibility in the future of promoting peace, stability, and prosperity. And of course, this ties in with the fact that the United States is now tearing its proverbial hair out simply because Modi looked extremely cozy with both Putin and with Xi, and it's more disturbing the United States, this rapprochement between the Chinese and the Indians, more than the pretty rock solid relationship that continues to develop between Russia and, of course, India. So China's perspective is quite simple. We need to showcase ourselves, and we, China, are going to do this as being what is termed a pillar of future global governance. in contrast to the United States and all the failures we have seen from that perspective for decades, not just about what Trump's done and upsetting the world with his tariffs, etc., and making idle threats against the likes of India with regards to the importing Russian oil. So, by announcing a need for a global governance issue, he also made reference to it relating that Xi is about sovereign equality, international rule of law, and multilateralism. Now, people will look at that and go, well, that's pretty meaningless. No, it's not. Because the one thing in the West that people really don't understand is, and you look at Europe as a great example of this, nations are not sovereign states. In Europe, they are subservient to the European Commission, who basically tries to bully them into submission, and the European Commission effectively is subservient to the United States. They're all heavily populated, that organization with Atlanticists. Now, when we say Atlanticists and subservient to the United States, we have to be careful because the United States is extremely polarized now as well in the process, which Trump, of course, has contributed quite significantly to that being the case. In terms of the international rule of law, that's basically saying we're sick and tired of this idiotic rules-based order, which is do as we say, not as we do. And if we can change the rules every 5 minutes to suit our individual needs and what we tell you to do and what we do, well, that just doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. And when we talk about multilateralism and globalization, we're talking about true multilateralism, true globalization, not all this fake multilateralism and fake globalization that clearly exists in the West. So, in essence, this is a rallying call to say enough is enough. We're sick and tired of being subservient or having to put up with the whims and the idiotic and crass behavior of the United States and its unipolar world. And there is no doubt there has been an awful lot of discussions between Putin and Xi, including, as I said, Xi's private residence. And this is basically saying, right, now is the time when we really have to start putting some teeth into the institutions like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I'm not saying it didn't have them, but it really has to start working. This is why more and more countries want to join, are being encouraged to join, and effectively saying, well, we've had enough of the United States trying to dictate global security. They cause mayhem across Eurasia, not just in terms of what's happened with Ukraine and Russia, but also all the meddling in the Central Asian republics with all the attempts in recent times to have regime change, all the meddling that's gone on in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, and all the threat of terrorism across even West Asia, etc., and really who's ultimately responsible. This has to end. We have to have a new global governance structure that includes security and security for all of Eurasia, from basically, you might argue, Portugal and Lisbon in the west, stretching all the way to Vladivostok in the east and south, through obviously Southeast Asia, which is part of Eurasia. And I would also arguably say in the future, you might as well include West Asia, obviously, as part of Eurasia. And these are now discussions that are going to say, right, we're going to have to insist that this is put in place. These measures are now no longer going to just be talking points. We perceive the West is in a state of total and utter terminal decline, to the point also not only in terminal decline, but on the verge of collapsing very soon. And we're going to have to do something because there's going to be a gigantic void left, and we're going to have to fill the void. And that's why, whilst we'll hear official statements about certain meetings, there is huge discussions going on between the Chinese and the Russians. It's also, of course, included times the Indians have been involved and various other leaders to say, now's the time to step up to the plate and really start to properly implement and develop the multipolar world and an acceptance that it's going to be our century and beyond, and not in an aggressive, hegemonic way, but to say unipolarity really is dead, and now we're going to have to start putting a global governance structure in, and we'll come on to what that might mean in a very high level way in a minute.
Yeah, one of the important points that you brought up, and this was mentioned by Putin uh, at the SCO meeting, was that the world needs a system that would replace outdated Eurocentric and Euro-Atlantic models. Now, obviously, you touched upon that a little bit, but more importantly, it's about colonial dominion power. First, from what came from Europe, and now the United States rules through its proxies, and everything follows the Euro-Atlantic model, going back first a couple hundred years, and then, of course, 500 years of colonialism. Multipolarity allows them the respect of sovereign nations and sovereign nations making decisions best for their own people. And we've talked about that in the past. And it's kind of interesting because there's an important thing, and we touched upon this before we started the recording, is that more than anything, this time in history, I believe you are correct that Putin, Xi, and even Modi, because of what the United States has done, the Trump administration forcing these tariffs and trying to force Modi to choose a side, he appears to be finally getting off that fence and choosing a side. And this is an opportunity now to accelerate at a time when Europe is absolutely bankrupt. I mean, when France is begging to come to the IMF for a loan just to be able to pay its bills. We had the podcast we talked about where the UK stands. Germany is in just as bad a straits. Much of Europe is, and they're reeling from what the potential loss of energy is, as Ukraine, as Kiev, uh, pretty much just burns everything to try to force a capitulation. The SCO nations and the BRICS nations, the multipolar world, is suddenly saying this is our time, just as like you pointed out, and now we can accelerate. Because in many ways, India, Russia, China, you have the energy country of the world. You have the productivity nation of the world in China. You have the service and the labor industry of India. Well, if the West is bankrupt, then there's going to be no need for them for those services, or they're going to be buying the products. So at this point, they need to find new markets. And, what a better way than to say, hey, if, you have the opportunity, Africa, West Asia, etc., to get away from being the ones who have been pillaged for centuries by this Euro-Atlantic model, and instead be able to stand in your own accord and work as an equal partner in this multipolar world.
Yeah, but China's already demonstrating its exports to the United States are now at 19-year lows. Yes, 19-year lows. China's rotating away. China's been the most, I wouldn't say aggressive, but the most assertive nation in saying, we want to walk away from this. They all, we need to reform all these post World War II Bretton Woods institutions. And it's not words now. It was words, it was platitudes, it didn't carry a lot of weight. Now it carries weight. And they're going to force the point. They're going to back the current system into a corner and say, okay, this is your last chance. You either make the appropriate changes or we'll just phase you out of relevance. We will have nothing to do with the UN. You can have the United States and its lackeys in Europe as the UN, but we'll move and create a new institution which will be fit for purpose. But The other thing is there was a lot of noises coming out about Shanghai Cooperation Organization realizing they're going to have to start to cooperate far more in a military sense. They're going to have to deal with international terrorism. We've spoken about that on and off for years, that is a huge problem. And all these international organizations are going to have to shape up or just simply cease to exist or become completely irrelevant in the process. And of course, there's the big need to deal with organized crime, with drug trafficking, human trafficking, all the things the West does nothing about. But Xi makes the point very clearly that the Cold War mentality, hegemonism, and protectionism are haunting the world. Global governance is now at a crossroads, and we need to seize that initiative and make it happen because we're the ones in the driving seat. We're the ones, the global south, who are in the ascendancy. Everything relates to what we can do now. And we can achieve a world that people believe is not possible. And the only people who believe it's not possible are those in the West, because we've lived in a world where we have this arrogance, ignorance, and stupidity that we're the dominant players. Well, we're no longer dominating anything. And therefore, we can have peaceful coexistence. We can have win-win cooperation. We can all just get along perfectly nicely. And we can remove a lot of threats. We can not have the issue in the future of worrying about wars or engineered wars. And we can deal with the issue of the threats of nuclear wars, though not that we're going to have nuclear war. I've made that point very clear, but start to deal with things in a concrete manner that means the global majority is going to be the ones making decisions. And if the global minority don't want to play ball, well, just go and rot in your own cesspit, which is what is exactly happening to us as Western countries, as economically and financially, geopolitically and societally. We just do sink into the abyss and we cease to be anything other than a totally failed empire who has never learnt any lessons, refused to accept that we had responsibility. But now the world's moving on and go. You no longer are going to be have any so-called responsibility. You're certainly not going to be in a position to behave as appallingly as you have done and how you've treated us for hundreds of years.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things that I see out of all this too is those who the United States have decreed as axis of evil, whether it's Iran, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Venezuela, they all are going to be some of the biggest beneficiaries. And we already see this, where Kim Jong-un was invited to Beijing for the 80th anniversary parade and celebration. We're seeing a lot of the nations that have been vilified and browbeaten by the United States and in many places Europe. Take Burkina Faso, for example, with France and the rest of Europe. These are opportunities, and they are rushing headlong. They're not playing the game of politics where they're still beholden to one side or the other and try to get what they can get. You're seeing more and more nations finally making that stand, and by having the SCO come together, laying down some hard rules, saying, you know what, make the choice. We want to help you. We want you to be a part of this, but we're not going to play the political games anymore. And I think more than anything, at least here in the outset of multipolarism or multipolarity, you're really starting to see where in the past there was all this talk about, 15 or 20 different nations joining BRICS, and they all have different ideas and different thoughts. And now it's coming to a cohesive, this is how we're going to enter the future. And holding on to any type of tendrils of the old way just isn't going to cut it.
No, absolutely. And I think a final point I would make is, and it's not uniquely the SCO, and this is the one big failing people have in understanding a multipolar world. They think it's all about the BRICS. It's not. BRICS is a tiny cog in a gigantic wheel with multiple other cogs. But for me, the SCO will end up dwarfing what the BRICS will achieve. And in essence, the SCO is to implement a multipolar world, to have it grounded in international law, and they want to create in Eurasia the architecture for equal and indivisible security via the SCO member states, and that in a broader sense you have the Greater Eurasian Partnership that basically connects all national development strategies, all regional integration, and it strengthens ties amongst BRICS, the SCO, the Eurasian Economic Union, the ASEAN countries, the RCEP, the CIS, the Gulf Cooperation Council. There is dozens of these organizations. And also within this architecture to create a fair economic financial system that allows all parties to benefit and not some parties to benefit and stamp all over other countries, such as what we've seen with appalling colonial behavior in Africa and not exclusively in Africa. And therefore, given the general noise that comes out of the SCO, I think you can look at this meeting in Tianjin being probably the most important development you will see in the SCO, and in a broader sense, multipolar world institutions in the last decade. And the reason being, if you don't have indivisible security and an architecture to protect Eurasia, and you don't have the Greater Eurasian Partnership being able to flourish on that basis, then you're never going to truly, really reap all the benefits of a multipolar world. And that's why, for me, this is an enormous development. And we come back, obviously, to that fundamental statement. This is why Putin is paying an unusually long visit to China, because beneath all the obvious discussions, there is a big move now to coin a phrase, reset the world, in which is fit for purpose for the next 200, 500, or 1,000 years.
Very well said. To everybody here at the Sirius Report community, as always, thank you for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.